GSK, and a London biotech called Relation Therapeutics. In July of 2026, these two companies expanded a research partnership that's worth paying attention to, up to $110 million, and a very different idea about what AI and drug discovery should actually buy. Here's the part that should surprise you. GSK isn't buying a drug. It isn't even buying a finished artificial intelligence model. It's paying Relation to run robotic experiments on human cells at massive scale and hand over the data. In an industry that just spent a decade racing to build the smartest algorithm, one of the world's biggest drug makers just wrote a 9-figure check for something far less glamorous, better raw material. Let's unpack why that might be the smarter bet. First, the facts. On July 30th, 2026, GSK and Relation Therapeutics announced an expanded research collaboration worth up to $110 million, paid as upfront and success-based milestone payments. This isn't a first date. The two companies already had a partnership around fibrotic disease and osteoarthritis, and this deal widens that scope to include immunology and inflammation. The timing isn't an accident either. Relation used the same announcement to unveil its flagship artificial intelligence model, called Morgan. The deal and the model are two halves of the same story. To understand the logic, meet the two players. GSK is one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, and like most of its peers, it's staring down a patent cliff, a wave of older blockbuster drugs losing exclusivity later this decade. Its answer has been to spend aggressively on next-generation research, including a pledge of at least $30 billion into U.S. research, development, and manufacturing over 5 years. Relation Therapeutics is much smaller, a London-based AI biotech that has built something unusual, an industrial-scale laboratory that runs automated experiments on human cells, purpose-built to feed an AI model. One company has the pipeline problem and a balance sheet. The other has a very specific kind of factory. Here's what makes this deal different from the standard artificial intelligence and pharma playbook. Most of these partnerships work like a licensing deal. A pharma company pays to use somebody else's already trained model and largely trust the output. GSK is doing something more unusual. It's funding the machinery that generates the training data itself, automated wet lab experiments on real human cells, at a scale no single lab could run alone. The logic is simple. Any model, however clever, is only as good as the data it learned from. So instead of just buying the smartest-looking output, GSK is helping build the factory that keeps feeding it better raw material. So what exactly is relation manufacturing? In cell biology, a perturbation is a deliberate nudge, edit a gene, or dose a cell with a drug, and then measure everything that happens next, which genes switch on, which proteins appear, how the whole cell state shifts. Do that once, and you learn about one gene, one drug. Do it automatically hundreds of thousands of times across many cell types, and you get a map of cause and effect inside human biology. That map is exactly what trains a model like Morgan to predict, before anyone touches a real dish, how a new drug or gene edit might behave. Relation calls its model Morgan for multi-omic regulatory genomics using artificial neural networks. In plain terms, it's built to predict how a human cell will respond to a genetic tweak or a drug before anyone runs the actual experiment. And crucially, it's designed as a general-purpose model, not a narrow tool for one disease, but something meant to get smarter and more broadly useful the more real biological data it sees. Relation's own language is bold. Its chief executive, David Roblin, has framed the goal as reaching what he calls transformationally different success rates in drug discovery. That's a big claim. No cellular foundation model from any company has produced an approved medicine yet, but it tells you what GSK thinks it's buying option on. This chart helps explain why. Drug discovery is a long pipeline from raw biological data to a computed model of that biology to a validated drug target, all the way to a clinical asset ready for trials. Relation sits early, generating the raw data and the model that interprets it. Noetik, a separate GSK deal from January of 2026 worth $50 million, sits a step further along, building virtual cell models specifically for cancer. In GSK's two recent acquisitions, IDRx and Boston Pharmaceuticals, sit at the far end, buying clinical stage assets outright for over $1 billion each. Put together, you can see the strategy. GSK is placing relatively small, early bets across the whole pipeline, while still paying up for the expensive, de-risked assets at the end. Relation isn't an isolated bet, either. It's the latest piece of a portfolio GSK has been assembling all through 2026. In January, it signed a multi-year deal with the genomics company Helix for cohort-level genetic data. The same month, it committed $50 million over 5 years to Noetik for virtual cell models targeting lung and colorectal cancer. Then in July came Relation and its expanded cellular data factory. Layer in an integration with Microsoft Discovery Platform for AI-assisted research workflows, and you get a company deliberately wiring artificial intelligence into research from several different angles at once, rather than betting the whole strategy on a single partner. Here's why fixing attrition is worth billions. Widely cited industry benchmarks show that of the drugs entering Phase 1 trials, roughly 2/3 make it to Phase 2. But Phase 2 is where the real graveyard is. Some call it the Phase 2 Valley of Death, because so many drugs that look promising fail here, often for a simple reason: the underlying drug target was never actually validated well enough in the first place. GSK's Chief Scientific Officer, Tony Wood, has publicly described the AI strategy as aimed squarely at that problem, catching a bad target before it reaches a patient, rather than discovering it failed after years and hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the real prize behind data like Relations, not a flashier model, but fewer expensive failures in the middle of the funnel. So what could actually put GSK ahead of rivals chasing the same idea? 5 things, really. First, proprietary access to data that nobody else can simply license, generated to order for GSK's own disease areas, not scraped from a public database everyone can reach. Second, GSK is spreading its risk across several small, early bets instead of gambling everything on one model or one partner. Third, Relation's own executives describe a genuine feedback loop. GSK's drug pipeline sharpens the model, and the model in turn sharpens the pipeline. Fourth, and this is the real prize, the stated goal is fixing the most expensive failure point in the entire industry, drugs that fail in the middle of clinical trials, by catching bad bets earlier and cheaper than a late-stage acquisition ever could. And fifth, Relation is a known quantity already, so there's little of the integration risk that comes with a brand new partner. Zoom out, and the pattern is a company stacking cheap options early, so that by the time a bet proves out, the expensive part, the clinical trial, is a much safer wager. On paper, the disclosed numbers alone show GSK's committed AI research spend climbing through the year, and that's before counting the undisclosed value of the Helix and Microsoft deals. None of these individual checks are large by pharma standards. Together, they add up to a company trying to buy itself a structural data advantage before its competitors catch on. No deep dive is complete without the honest risks. No cellular foundation model, from Relation or any competitor, has yet produced an approved medicine. This is a crowded field. Recursion, in sitro, isomorphic labs, Chai Discovery, and others are all racing toward versions of the same idea, and most of them make similarly bold claims. Relation's promise of transformationally different success rates is exactly that, a promise, not yet a published result anyone can independently verify. The deal structure hints that GSK knows this too. Much of the money is milestone-based, meaning GSK only pays the full amount if the science actually delivers. And realistically, if this bet pays off, the payoff is years away. This is a wager on research infrastructure, not a shortcut to a near-term blockbuster. So why would one of the world's biggest drug makers pay up to $110 million for lab robots generating spreadsheets of cellular data? Because in the end, every AI model, however impressive its demo, is downstream of what it was trained on. GSK could have simply licensed someone else's finished algorithm. Instead, it's helping fund the raw material, real, purpose-built, human biological data, betting that whoever owns the best data, not just the flashiest model, will own the next decade of drug discovery. It's an unglamorous bet. It might also be the smart one. Thanks for watching. This has been a Life Sciences AI commercial deep dive.